The mop slipped from her trembling hands as his voice sliced through the marble air. "You're fired." The entire lobby froze, eyes shifting from the white executive's smirk to the black woman standing still, her silence louder than his cruelty. What he didn't know, what not a single soul in that building knew, was that the woman he just mocked wasn't just a cleaner. She was the billionaire CEO who owned everything he thought he controlled. And this was the moment that would change both of their lives forever. Hey everyone, welcome to today's story, an emotional and powerful tale about respect, redemption, and unexpected love. Before we dive in, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your country or city in the comments below so I can see how far our family reaches across the world. And while you're at it, please hit that like button. It really helps this channel grow and lets me know you want more stories like this. Now, let's begin. It was 6:45 a.m. when the skyscrapers of Manhattan began to glow with the first kiss of sunlight. The city pulsed awake, taxi horns, the chatter of commuters, the faint hum of ambition stretching across every glass window. Inside the 47-story building of Callaway and Haynes Enterprises, a woman in a navy janitorial uniform pushed her cleaning cart down the marble hallway. Her name tag read Ava. But the world didn't need to know her last name, at least not yet. She moved quietly, every motion deliberate. There was a grace in the way she wiped the glass doors, as though she wasn't just cleaning but preparing a stage for something larger. Beneath her calm exterior was a heart that carried both pride and pain. Ava Thompson, the billionaire CEO no one knew was already here. For weeks, she'd been moving through the company unnoticed, watching how people treated those they thought were beneath them. She wanted to see the truth behind their polished smiles before she took her rightful seat as CEO. The smell of citrus cleaner filled the corridor. Ava adjusted her gloves and glanced at the reflections on the glass, reflections of people who never noticed her. One young assistant walked by, face buried in her phone, muttering, "You missed a spot." Ava smiled faintly and moved aside. Her mother's voice whispered in her memory, "Baby, dignity isn't what they give you, it's what you never let them take." She'd lived by those words since she was a little girl watching her mother scrub the same corporate floors. Upstairs, on the 40th floor, Richard Callaway strutted out of his corner office. Tall, expensively tailored, and surrounded by an air of entitlement, he was everything the world applauded, a man who looked like success. His watch gleamed, his confidence unshakable, but inside he felt the gnawing fear of irrelevance. The board had been hinting about new leadership. Younger blood. Diversity. Words that made him grit his teeth. As he barked instructions to his assistant, he passed a group of cleaners mopping the hallway. He didn't even glance at them. To him, they were part of the furniture, silent, invisible, forgettable. When he caught sight of Ava bending to pick up a paper someone had dropped, he frowned slightly. Something about her composure unsettled him. She didn't shrink away like the others. Her movements were confident, measured, almost dignified. He brushed it off and kept walking. In the lobby below, Ava finished her shift early, taking a seat on a bench near the elevator. She watched people pass, men in crisp suits, women clutching coffee cups, faces set in determination. She'd been one of them once, desperate to be seen, desperate to prove. Now she wanted to see who they were when they thought no one important was watching. When the elevator doors opened, Richard stepped out, phone pressed to his ear, voice sharp with irritation. "No, Charles, I don't care who the new CEO is," he said. "They'll answer to me eventually. They always do." His tone was filled with the arrogance of someone who'd never been challenged. Ava looked up from her clipboard, their eyes meeting for the first time. A flash of recognition, then dismissal. He didn't know her face. "Not yet." "You missed a corner," he said coldly, pointing at the floor near the reception desk. His words were like shards of ice. "Try to keep it professional. We've got investors walking in." Ava simply nodded, her expression unreadable. "Yes, sir." Her voice was soft but carried an undertone, calm, controlled power. He turned and walked away, smirking. That night, Ava stood at the window of her penthouse, staring down at the same building she'd walked through as a cleaner. The city lights glittered below like a constellation of possibilities. Tomorrow, she would walk into that same building again, but this time, as herself. The new CEO. The irony made her heart ache and her lips curve in a faint, bittersweet smile. She whispered to her reflection, let's see who they really are when the masks come off. The next morning, the company buzzed with anticipation. Rumors about the new CEO had spread like wildfire. Some said it was an overseas investor, others whispered it was the founder's nephew. No one suspected the woman pushing a cleaning cart in the corner. Ava arrived early again, blending into the background as people speculated about her. Probably some guy in his 50s, Richard told his assistant, smirking. They always pick safe hands. Someone who knows the hierarchy. His assistant chuckled, agreeing too quickly. Ava, wiping a nearby glass panel, caught the exchange and filed it away. She'd seen this kind of arrogance before, the kind that spoke louder than any board report. It was time to know how deep it went. Just before noon, a small accident pulled them together. Ava was polishing a brass plaque near the conference room when Richard, walking by too fast and talking too loudly, brushed past her shoulder. The bucket tipped, spilling soapy water across the polished floor. "Watch where you're going," he snapped. The liquid reflected the shock in her eyes, and for a moment, the building seemed to fall silent. Ava steadied herself, then calmly said, "I'm sorry, sir." He exhaled sharply. "You people always have excuses. Just clean it up." That "you people" cut through the air like a blade. Ava froze, not out of fear, but out of restraint. Years of composure pressed down on her tongue. She wanted to respond, but she didn't. Instead, she held his gaze and said softly, "You shouldn't talk to people that way." He scoffed, unaware that his arrogance had just written his own downfall. "You're just the cleaner," he sneered. "Don't tell me how to run my building." She blinked once, then lowered her eyes. "Yes, Mr. Calloway." When he walked away, she let out a long, steady breath. Tomorrow, he would know exactly who he had spoken to that way. The act ends with Ava standing alone in the empty hallway, mopping slowly, her reflection shimmering in the wet floor. For the first time, she allows herself a faint, knowing smile. "Just a cleaner," she murmurs. "We'll see." Have you ever been treated like you were invisible, only to later prove them wrong? Tell me your story down in the comments. I read every one. And if you're feeling Ava's quiet strength already, hit that like button to show her some love. Friday morning. The sun blazed through the glass walls of Calloway and Haynes like a spotlight on an unprepared stage. The lobby buzzed with tension. Today was the day the new CEO would be officially introduced to the company. No one knew who it was, not even Richard Calloway, who strutted through the crowd like he already owned the place. The marble floor gleamed. The scent of polished brass and perfume hung in the air. Ava was there early again, dressed in her plain cleaner's uniform, wiping down the conference room windows just before the meeting began. She could hear the chatter of executives outside the glass walls, bets being made on who that mystery CEO might be. "I heard it's some old guy from London," one whispered. "Probably another suit with too much money and too little empathy." Or worse, another joked, "A woman." They all laughed, the sound sharp and hollow. Ava said nothing. She continued cleaning, the slow circular motion of her cloth the only rhythm that made sense in that noise. She didn't come here for recognition. She came for revelation. At 9:45 a.m., Richard arrived in a crisp grey suit, his silver tie shining. He was in full command of his stage. "All right, everyone," he said, clapping his hands, "we've got the board and new investors arriving in 15 minutes. Let's keep this place spotless. Presentation matters." His eyes landed on Ava, who was just finishing up her section of the floor. A small smear of water reflected light near his shoe. He frowned. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "Can you not see that spot? We have billionaires walking in here any minute, and this is the standard you bring." Ava straightened slowly, looking at him. "I was just about to clean that, sir." Her tone was calm, respectful. Too calm. It only agitated him more. You people always have a reason, don't you? He said loudly, gesturing toward her with an exaggerated motion. The room quieted. Excuses. That's all it is. Excuses and underperformance. You're standing in one of the most powerful companies in America, and this is the effort you give. A few assistants exchanged awkward glances. One whispered, "She's new. Maybe just let her finish." But Richard wasn't done. He smirked. No. I think she's done enough. He jabbed a finger toward her name tag, Ava, right? You're fired. Pack your things and get out. A stunned silence filled the lobby. The janitorial staff froze. One man in a blue uniform stopped mid-mop, his mouth slightly open. Even the receptionist looked up, horrified. Ava didn't move. Her eyes stayed fixed on his face, steady, calm, unreadable. Are you deaf? Richard said, his voice cutting the air like glass. I said you're fired. The moment hung heavy. Every sound, the ticking clock, the elevator bell, the faint hum of electricity, seemed to fade into nothing. Ava finally spoke. You shouldn't have done that, she said softly. Her tone wasn't angry. It wasn't even hurt. It was the kind of quiet that carried truth, a truth so deep it made him blink. Excuse me, he barked. You heard me. Her gaze never wavered. You shouldn't have done that. He scoffed, turning to his assistant. Get her escorted out. And make sure we don't hire anyone else who doesn't understand professionalism. As security approached, Ava calmly picked up her cart. Every step she took echoed through the lobby. The humiliation was supposed to crush her, but somehow it didn't. Instead, it illuminated her strength. Around her, whispers rippled. That was harsh. Did he really just fire her in front of everyone? Man, that's cold. But Richard stood tall, convinced he'd just defended company standards. To him, the world made sense, hierarchy maintained, authority intact. When she reached the door, Ava paused. She turned slightly, her eyes finding his one last time. Mr. Calloway, she said. I'll see you soon. He rolled his eyes, not understanding. Let's hope not. She left without another word. The moment lingered, strange and uncomfortable. A few staff members went back to work, pretending nothing had happened. But the silence that followed carried an unseen weight, a storm quietly forming. Later that morning, the entire company gathered in the top-floor boardroom for the CEO introduction. The massive table gleamed under recessed lighting. Coffee cups clinked, pens tapped nervously. Richard leaned against the window, chatting with other executives about quarterly projections. I hear the new CEO's arriving any minute, one said. You ready to charm your new boss? Richard smirked. Please. Whoever it is, they'll see my track record and know I'm irreplaceable. A hush fell as the chairman entered, clearing his throat. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, thank you for being here to welcome our new chief executive officer. The door opened. Footsteps. Soft, composed. When Ava walked into the room, wearing a fitted charcoal suit and calm authority, time itself seemed to stop. Every jaw dropped. Richard's smirk froze halfway. The color drained from his face. The woman he'd fired, the one he'd mocked as just a cleaner, was standing at the head of the table. Good morning, Ava said, her voice steady and elegant. I'm Ava Thompson, your new CEO. The air was electric, silent, charged with disbelief. Richard's eyes flicked to the chairman, then back to her. This must be a joke, he stammered. The chairman smiled politely. No joke. Ms. Thompson finalized her acquisition of majority shares last month. Effective today, she runs this company. Ava met Richard's eyes, her expression calm but unyielding. Mr. Calloway, she said softly, I believe we've met. Laughter rippled uncomfortably through the room. Richard's throat tightened. The same phrase she'd whispered in the lobby, "You shouldn't have done that," echoed inside his mind like thunder. "Let's begin," Ava continued, taking her seat at the head of the table. Her presence commanded the room without effort. Power didn't need to shout, it just needed to stand tall and speak truth. As she began outlining her vision for the company, Richard sat frozen, feeling smaller than he ever had before. For the first time in years, he wasn't the most powerful man in the room. He was just a man who'd been exposed by his own arrogance. When the meeting ended, he lingered in silence while everyone else congratulated Ava. She approached him last, her steps soft but firm. "I told you I'd see you soon," she said quietly. He swallowed, words failing him. "I didn't know." "That's the problem," she replied, looking him straight in the eye. "You never cared to." She walked away, leaving him in the echo of his own downfall. The lobby where he'd once humiliated her now felt like a mirror, every reflection reminding him of what he'd become. The boardroom emptied slowly after Ava's announcement, but the silence that lingered between her and Richard was heavier than any applause. Outside the glass walls, the skyline glittered, indifferent to the humiliation burning in Richard Calloway's chest. He straightened his suit, his jaw tight, his mind racing to rewrite what had just happened. "She can't possibly last," he muttered under his breath. "A CEO who plays janitor? That's ridiculous." But no amount of denial could undo the truth. He had fired the woman who now signed his paychecks. That realization burned deeper than embarrassment, it was exposure. For years, Richard had built his entire identity on control, on being the man no one could humiliate. Now, all it took was one quiet woman to unravel him. Ava, meanwhile, returned to her temporary office, her expression unreadable, her composure unbroken. Yet beneath that poise was a storm. She hadn't wanted revenge. She'd wanted revelation. But as she stared out the window, she felt the sting of what it meant to be underestimated again. Even as CEO, even owning the building, she'd still had to pretend to be small to be seen. That thought haunted her. Later that afternoon, HR called Richard for a formal debrief. The irony made him laugh bitterly. The cleaner he'd mocked was now his superior, and HR was treating him like an intern on his first day. The conference room felt colder than usual. Ava entered quietly, accompanied by the board's legal advisor. "Mr. Calloway," she began, "we need to discuss this morning's incident." He rose from his seat defensively. "With all due respect, Ms. Thompson, this was a misunderstanding." "I had no idea who you were, that's exactly the problem," she interrupted softly, her voice calm but piercing. "You didn't need to know who I was to treat me with respect." The words hung heavy. Richard's mouth opened, but no defense came. "I wasn't being discriminatory," he blurted. "I was enforcing professionalism." Ava tilted her head slightly. "By humiliating an employee in public." He swallowed hard. "I overreacted. I was under pressure." The investors," she repeated, almost whispering. "Or your pride?" Silence. For the first time in years, Richard felt cornered, not by power, but by truth. "You'll remain in your position for now," Ava said, her tone steady. "I believe in accountability, not destruction. But I will be watching closely. This company is changing, Mr. Calloway. You can either evolve with it, or be replaced by it." She stood, signaling the meeting was over. As she turned to leave, Richard said quietly, "You could have fired me." She stopped, her back still to him. "I could have," she replied, "but then I'd be just like you were." That line sank into his bones. She walked away, her heels clicking in perfect rhythm, a sound that would echo in his memory for weeks. Over the next few days, tension filled the air like static. Rumors spread quickly through the company about the CEO who'd gone undercover, about the executive who'd mocked her. Some admired Ava's grace. Others whispered that she was too soft for not firing Richard outright. The building had become a pressure cooker of judgment. Every time Richard walked through the halls, he felt eyes on him. The same people who once sought his approval now avoided his gaze. The whispers cut deeper than insults. That's the guy who fired the boss. He's done. Serves him right. At first, Richard tried to ignore it. He buried himself in spreadsheets and projections, convincing himself that work could erase shame. But the more he tried to cling to control, the more he felt it slipping. In a cruel twist of irony, the company he'd once dominated now operated under the quiet, moral compass of the woman he'd disrespected. He found himself watching Ava from a distance, her calm authority, her ability to command respect without raising her voice. Every meeting she led reminded him of what leadership was supposed to look like. During one particularly tense strategy session, Richard found himself blurting, "With all due respect, Ms. Thompson, this isn't how we usually handle mergers." The room went silent. Ava turned to him, her expression unreadable. "I'm aware," she said. "That's why I'm handling it differently." The room stayed frozen. Then, instead of chastising him, she added softly, "But I do value your experience, Mr. Calloway. If you have a better suggestion, I'm listening." The kindness in her tone hit harder than anger ever could. He cleared his throat. "No, Your plan works." "Good," she replied with a faint nod. "Then let's make it happen." That night, Richard sat alone in his office, the city glittering beneath him. He thought about her words, "You didn't need to know who I was to treat me with respect." They echoed in his head like a confession he hadn't yet made. The guilt was unbearable, but so was the realization of what she'd shown him, leadership with grace, not vengeance. Ava, on the other hand, wrestled with her own conflict. The part of her that wanted to forgive clashed with the part that remembered every time someone like Richard had made her feel small. But she couldn't lead from bitterness. She knew that. "Justice without mercy becomes cruelty," her mother used to say. She repeated those words now, whispering them into the quiet of her office. Yet the irony wasn't lost on her. She was leading a man who once stripped her of her dignity, and now she was responsible for his. It was a strange kind of power, one that tested her character more than her authority. By Friday, an unexpected announcement arrived in the company-wide email. Ava had appointed Richard to co-lead a special restructuring committee aimed at improving company culture and diversity. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Some thought it was punishment. Others saw it as poetic. Richard saw it as torment. He couldn't refuse the assignment, but working beside Ava every day would mean facing his shame in full color. When he received the memo, he leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. "She's either trying to destroy me," he muttered, "or teach me." He wasn't sure which was worse. Ava, meanwhile, sat in her office looking over the same document. Her reflection in the glass looked tired, but resolute. "Let's see who you really are when no one's watching," she whispered. Her assistant knocked softly on the door. "Ms. Thompson?" "The press wants a quote about the restructuring initiative." Ava smiled faintly. "Tell them it's about building bridges where walls once stood." Monday morning came with a cold drizzle over Manhattan, the kind that blurred the skyline and made everything feel heavier. Inside Calloway and Haynes, the tension between Ava and Richard simmered just beneath the surface. Everyone in the company knew about their new collaboration, though no one dared to speak of it out loud. Ava had assigned Richard as co-lead of the restructuring initiative, an effort to transform the company's culture from the inside out. The irony was poetic. The man who once humiliated her now had to help her rebuild the very system that had empowered his arrogance. Their first meeting together took place in Conference Room 12B, a glass-walled space overlooking the rain-soaked city. Richard arrived early, nerves twisting in his stomach. He had rehearsed apologies in his mind all weekend, but none of them felt right. Ava entered silently, dressed in a crisp white blouse and tailored slacks. Her confidence filled the room before she spoke. "Good morning, Mr. Calloway," she said evenly, setting her folder on the table. "Good morning, Ms. Thompson," he replied, standing a little too quickly. "Please, sit," she said, her tone calm but distant. "We have a lot to discuss." For the first half hour, the air was thick with unspoken words. They discussed budget allocations, training initiatives, and department evaluations, all with the precision of two people fencing behind polite smiles. But beneath that professionalism, something else was brewing: curiosity. Richard found himself watching the way she thought, how she paused before answering, how her eyes softened when she spoke about fairness and opportunity. There was power in her calm. He realized, with a quiet sting, that he had never really listened to a woman like her before. Not out of disrespect, but out of blindness. As the meeting ended, Ava gathered her notes. "You'll handle the internal audit," she said. "I'll oversee implementation." He nodded. "Understood." She glanced up. "And Richard?" He froze. "Yes?" "This isn't punishment," she said softly. "It's participation." For a moment, he didn't understand. "I'm giving you the chance to help change the culture you helped create," she continued. "Don't waste it." Then she walked out, leaving him with those words echoing in his mind. Over the next several weeks, they worked side by side more often than either expected. Late nights reviewing reports turned into quiet conversations about leadership and legacy. Ava remained professional but never cold. Richard, stripped of his old arrogance, became more observant. He noticed small things: the way she treated the janitorial staff by name, the way she asked for everyone's opinion in meetings, even the interns. One evening, as the office lights dimmed and most employees had gone home, Richard found himself pausing outside her door. She was alone, reviewing files, her face illuminated by the glow of her monitor. "You ever sleep?" he asked, attempting a smile. She didn't look up. "Sleep doesn't build companies, Mr. Calloway." "Neither does pride," he said quietly. That made her glance up. Their eyes met, a flicker of mutual understanding passing between them. "Fair point," she said. "I suppose we're both learning that lesson." There was a small silence, comfortable, this time. He took a breath. "Miss Thompson, Ava, about what happened in the lobby," she held up a hand gently. "You don't need to say it again." "But I do," he insisted. "I was cruel. And not because you did anything wrong, but because I needed to feel above someone." "It's pathetic, I know." Ava studied him for a long moment. "It's human," she said softly. "But it's not who you have to keep being." That night, as Richard left the building, he felt something strange: relief. The walls of pride he'd built for years were beginning to crack, and through the cracks came light. The next morning, word spread that the restructuring team had already made progress: anonymous surveys, open discussions, and workshops to address bias and leadership empathy. Employees were surprised. Change was actually happening. At one point, Ava overheard two junior analysts whisper, "You can feel it, right? The company's different now." Richard, standing nearby, heard it too. For the first time in a long while, he smiled, not the smug grin of control, but the quiet satisfaction of purpose. Later that week, Ava and Richard presented their first progress report to the board. When Ava credited collaborative efforts led by Mr. Calloway, the room turned to him in mild surprise. She didn't have to do that, but she did. As the board applauded, Richard caught her eye and mouthed, "Thank you." She simply nodded. That night, as they left the building together, the rain returned. Ava paused under the awning, watching the droplets blur the city lights. "You ever think people can change?" she asked quietly. Richard looked at her, then at the street ahead. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I think some people make you want to try." For a moment, the world went still: the rain, the city, the noise, all fading into silence. Then Ava smiled faintly. "Good answer," she said, stepping into the rain. The city hummed with restless energy as summer settled over Manhattan. Inside Calloway and Haynes, change was in the air: quiet, steady, undeniable. The restructuring initiative had started to reshape not only policies but people. Departments that once operated like rival kingdoms now shared ideas. Junior employees spoke up in meetings. And through it all, Ava and Richard worked side by side, their dynamic evolving from tense professionalism to something more human, more complicated. One Thursday evening, after hours of reviewing progress reports, Ava closed her laptop and leaned back. The office was silent except for the rain pattering against the tall windows. "We're getting somewhere," she murmured. Richard, across the table, looked exhausted but content. "You were right," he said. "Real change starts small. Conversations, not policies." She smiled faintly. "My mother used to say the same thing." He tilted his head. "Your mother?" Ava's gaze softened. "She was a janitor. Worked in this same building 30 years ago." Richard blinked, sitting up slightly. "This building?" "Amham. 3rd floor. Night shift. I used to wait for her in the lobby doing my homework while she cleaned executive offices." Ava's voice grew distant, lost in memory. "She used to tell me, don't ever let them make you feel small for doing honest work." For the first time, Richard saw her not as a CEO, not even as the woman he'd wronged, but as a daughter, carrying the legacy of someone who'd once mopped these same floors. "She sounds extraordinary," he said softly. Ava nodded. "She was. She passed away before she could see what came of it all." A silence fell, gentle, reverent. Then, breaking it, Richard said, "You know, my father would have hated that story." Ava's brow furrowed slightly. "Why?" He gave a dry laugh. "Because he believed people only deserved respect if they'd earned it. And by earned it, he meant money, titles, reputation." He sighed, eyes fixed on the rain. "He used to tell me, power isn't given, son, it's taken. I spent my whole life trying to prove him right." "And do you still believe him?" she asked. Richard hesitated. "I did," he admitted. "Until I met someone who proved me wrong." Their eyes met, unspoken understanding flowing between them. It wasn't romantic, not yet, but it was real. For the first time in his life, Richard felt seen not for his success, but for his struggle. Later that night, after Ava left, he stayed behind, restless. Something about her story haunted him. He wandered down to the archives, rows of old company photos, dusty ledgers, forgotten plaques. The air was thick with history. Then he found it, a framed photograph from 1994. The building's maintenance team, smiling proudly. Among them, a young black woman with kind eyes and tired hands. Her name tag read R. Thompson. Richard traced the name with his finger. Ava's mother. He stood there for a long time, staring at that picture. For the first time in years, tears pricked his eyes. The realization hit him hard. He had humiliated a woman whose mother had literally helped build the foundation beneath his success. Guilt washed over him like a tide. The next morning, he arrived early and left a single printed photo on Ava's desk, her mother's picture, restored and reprinted in color. Beneath it, he'd written in neat handwriting, "She deserved better. And so do you." When Ava saw it, she froze. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, slowly, she sat down and touched the photo, her throat tightening. She didn't cry, but her eyes shimmered. Later that day, she found Richard in the boardroom, staring out the window. "You found her," she said quietly. He turned, startled, then nodded. "I thought you should have it." "Thank you," she said softly. "That means more than you know." "No," he said, shaking his head. "I think I finally do." They stood in silence, the weight of shared truth settling between them. For the first time, there was no hierarchy, no title, just two people standing on equal ground, learning what it meant to see each other clearly. That evening, after most of the staff had gone, Ava lingered at her desk, the photo of her mother propped beside her computer. She whispered, "You were right, Mama. Dignity doesn't need an audience." Across the city, Richard sat alone in his apartment, staring at the skyline. He poured himself a drink but didn't take a sip. Instead, he picked up his phone, typed a message to Ava, and deleted it 3 times before finally sending, "Thank you for letting me stay. I want to do better." Minutes later, her reply came, "Then do it." Simple. Firm. Forgiving, but not soft. And for the first time in his life, Richard Calloway felt the quiet ache of humility, the kind that doesn't crush you but rebuilds you piece by piece. The sky over Manhattan split open with thunder that night, rain slashing down the glass of Calloway and Haynes like an old truth trying to wash itself clean. Most of the staff had gone home early, but Ava and Richard stayed behind, working through the final drafts of the restructuring proposal that was due in the morning. The storm outside howled like it had something to say. Inside, silence wrapped around them like fragile glass. "Looks like we're not leaving anytime soon," Richard muttered, glancing at the sheets of rain beyond the window. Ava smirked faintly without looking up from her laptop. "You afraid of getting wet, Mr. Calloway?" "Afraid," he said with mock offense. "I just don't like the idea of catching pneumonia for a PowerPoint." "Then we agree on something for once," she replied. They both laughed quietly. The tension that had shadowed every interaction between them was beginning to dissolve. Ava stood and walked toward the small kitchenette at the back of the office. "Coffee?" she asked. "Black." "No sugar," he said automatically. "Still trying to prove you're tough?" "Old habits die hard." She handed him the mug. Their fingers brushed briefly, and something unspoken flickered between them, a warmth neither expected. They drank in silence for a while, listening to the rain hammering against the building. Then Richard said, almost hesitantly, "Can I ask you something?" Ava glanced at him. "Depends on what it is." "Why come back here undercover? You could have walked in on day one as CEO. You didn't owe this place anything." Ava set her mug down slowly. "Because I needed to see what I was leading," she said. "I wanted to understand how the company treated people who didn't have a voice. My mother used to say, power without empathy just builds prettier cages. I didn't want to be another person decorating the same prison." Richard stared at her, the words sinking deep. "And now that you've seen it," he asked quietly. "Now I know how deep the rock goes," she replied. "But also how much good can still grow if someone's willing to try." He nodded slowly. "You're not what I expected." She smiled faintly. "Neither are you." The lights flickered, then went out completely. The office plunged into darkness. "Perfect," Richard muttered. "Storm must have killed the power." Ava laughed softly in the dark. "Looks like we're really trapped now." He could hear the smile in her voice. "You find this funny?" "A little," she said. "The universe has a sense of irony." He chuckled, shaking his head. "You know, a week ago, being stuck in the dark with you would have terrified me. And now? Now it feels like I might actually learn something." They found a flashlight in a drawer and set it on the table between them, its warm glow softening the edges of the room. Shadows danced across their faces. Ava leaned against the window, watching the storm outside. "I used to love nights like this," she said quietly. "When I was a kid, the rain meant my mom would be home late. I'd wait up for her, listening to the thunder and counting seconds between the lightning. It made me feel less alone." Richard's expression softened. "You must miss her." "Every day," Ava said simply. "She worked herself to exhaustion just to give me a chance. Every time I walk through that lobby, I think about her pushing that mop bucket." "And now you own the building," he said softly. "Yeah," she said, smiling faintly. "But some days, it still feels like I'm mopping the floor." The honesty in her words hit him harder than any reprimand. He looked down at his hands, then said, "You know, I've spent most of my life running from who I am. My father used to tell me that emotions were weakness. I believed him. So I built walls, climbed ladders, and forgot how to feel anything but fear of falling." Ava studied him. "And now you've fallen." He gave a small, self-deprecating smile. "Hard. Then maybe it's time you learn to stand differently." He looked up, their eyes meeting through the flickering flashlight glow. The air between them grew still. Outside, lightning illuminated the skyline for a heartbeat, and in that flash, something shifted. Not romance yet, but the undeniable gravity of two souls finally unmasked. The storm raged for hours. They talked through most of it, about mistakes, second chances, race, privilege, ambition, and regret. They laughed unexpectedly. They disagreed fiercely. But every word drew them closer, dissolving the invisible walls that had divided them. Around midnight, the storm began to fade. The power returned, humming softly through the building. Ava stood, stretching. "It's late," she said. "You should get some rest." Richard nodded but lingered, reluctant to leave. "Ava?" "Yes?" "You were right about one thing," he said quietly. "Power without empathy builds prettier cages. I've lived in one my whole life." Ava tilted her head, her voice gentle. "Then tear it down." For a long moment, neither spoke. The city outside glowed again, reflected in the office windows. Finally, Richard smiled, a small, genuine one. "Good night, Ava." "Good night, Richard." When he left, Ava watched him disappear down the hallway, feeling something new in the air, something fragile, cautious, and deeply human. Maybe change wasn't born in boardrooms or headlines. Maybe it started right there in the quiet spaces between thunder and forgiveness. By the time the storm cleared, Manhattan was washed clean but uneasy. The next morning brought an eerie calm to Calloway and Haynes, the kind that comes before something breaks. Ava walked into the office early, coffee in hand, ready to finalize the restructuring proposal for public release. What she didn't expect was the silence. The kind of silence that felt watched. Her assistant met her at the elevator, pale and nervous. "Ms. Thompson, there's something you should see." Ava followed her into the boardroom, where the morning news played on a mounted screen. Her heart dropped. The headline read, "Leaked emails reveal CEO's undercover return, corporate deception or strategic move." The footage cut to blurry photos of Ava working undercover months earlier, sweeping the floor, taking notes in employee lounges, observing from the shadows. Someone had leaked everything, her plan, her methods, even private memos to the board. Richard burst into the room moments later, face tight with disbelief. "Ava, I just saw it." "How did they?" "I don't know," she cut in. "The files were encrypted. Which means someone on the inside did this." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing. "They're calling you manipulative, Ava. That you lied to your employees." She stared at the screen, jaw set. "I didn't lie. I listened." "They won't care about the difference," he said grimly. She turned to face him. "Then we'll make them care." Within hours, the company was in crisis mode. Journalists swarmed the front lobby. Stockholders demanded explanations. The same employees who'd once admired her transparency now whispered about betrayal. The irony stung. After fighting to create honesty, she was accused of deceit. In an emergency board meeting, the pressure mounted. "Ms. Thompson," said one of the older directors, voice sharp, "you infiltrated your own company under false pretenses. How do you expect anyone to trust you now?" Ava clasped her hands calmly. "Trust isn't about comfort," she said. "It's about truth. And the truth is this company only listens when someone forces it to. If I had walked in as CEO from day one, I never would have seen what was broken. I had to see it from the ground up, just like my mother did." The room fell silent. Even her critics hesitated. But before anyone could respond, another voice spoke. "She's right." All eyes turned. It was Richard. He stood at the far end of the table, steady and clear. "When I was in charge, I didn't see people. I saw performance metrics, profits, and names on spreadsheets. She saw the people behind those names. That's leadership. You don't have to like her methods, but you'd better respect her results." The board murmured among themselves. Richard's defense carried weight. It was the first time he'd publicly supported her. After the meeting, as the chaos simmered outside, Ava found Richard in the hallway. "You didn't have to do that," she said quietly. "Yes, I did," he replied. "You took the heat for trying to fix what I helped break." And now you're standing in the fire with me, she said, half smiling. I'm where I should have been all along, he said. Later that evening, the company held a press conference. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Ava stepped up to the podium, hand steady even as the noise swelled around her. I went undercover not to deceive, she began, her voice firm, but to understand. What I found were people working hard, unseen, unheard, and undervalued. That ends today. If transparency is what you want, you'll get it. Every mistake, every plan, every change will be public. This company was built on silence. It's time it learned to listen. Her words struck a chord. Some applauded. Some didn't. But all of them listened. That night, the city felt heavy again, but not hopeless. Back in her office, Ava sat staring at the rain streaking down the glass. The weight of the day pressed on her shoulders. Richard knocked lightly and stepped in. The board split, he said. Half want to back you. Half want a vote of no confidence. She nodded slowly. I figured. You're not alone, Ava, he said. Not this time. She looked up, exhaustion softening into gratitude. Why are you doing this, Richard? You don't owe me anything. I'm not doing it for you, he said quietly. I'm doing it because for the first time, I believe in something real. A pause hung between them. Then Ava smiled faintly. That's new for both of us. He chuckled softly. Guess we're both learning. Outside, the storm returned, distant thunder echoing over the city like applause from a sky that finally approved. As lightning lit the skyline, Ava whispered to herself, let them come. I've weathered worse. The fallout came fast. Within 48 hours of the press conference, Calloway and Haynes became the center of a media storm. Every headline was a variation of the same question, visionary or villain. Investors panicked, analysts speculated, and employees whispered in the hallways, torn between admiration and fear. Ava walked through the chaos with her usual calm, but inside she was burning. She had fought for transparency, for truth, but now it felt like the truth was consuming her. Her assistant slipped her a note that morning, board emergency meeting at 2 p.m. Vote on your position. Ava exhaled slowly. The reckoning had come sooner than expected. Across the city, Richard sat in his office, watching the storm unfold online. Every news outlet was dissecting her choices. Some called her brave. Others called her manipulative. But all he saw was a woman trying to rebuild a system that had tried to bury her. He picked up his phone, hesitated, then grabbed his coat and left. When Ava entered the boardroom that afternoon, the tension was thick enough to taste. Every director sat stiffly, papers stacked like weapons. The chairwoman cleared her throat. Ms. Thompson, as of this morning, there is a motion to remove you as CEO, pending review of your methods and conduct. Ava nodded. I understand. Do you have anything to say before we proceed? Ava stood, steady, resolute. Only this, I didn't come here to play it safe. I came to change the way this company treats people. And if that costs me this chair, then maybe I was never meant to sit in it. But I won't apologize for doing what's right. The room buzzed with whispers. Before the vote could begin, the door opened. Richard walked in, uninvited. Sorry to interrupt, he said, voice calm but commanding. But before anyone casts a vote, you should all see this. He placed a stack of papers on the table, employee testimonials, anonymous surveys, letters from staff members thanking Ava for her work. This is the company she built, he said. Not the one you're afraid of losing. One of the directors frowned. Mr. Calloway, you no longer hold an executive position here. No, Richard interrupted, but I helped build this place, and I helped break it too. If you're going to judge her, then you'd better judge me right beside her. The room fell silent. Ava looked at him, stunned. It wasn't just support, it was solidarity. The vote went forward anyway. It was close, too close, but in the end, the motion failed by a single vote. Ava remained CEO. When the meeting ended, she found Richard waiting by the window, the city sprawling beneath them. "You didn't have to do that," she said softly. "Yeah," he replied. "But I wanted to. You just saved my job." "No," he said, shaking his head. "You saved mine a long time ago. I'm just trying to return the favor." They stood there for a while, quiet. The tension that once defined them had become something else entirely, something unspoken but undeniable. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days. "You know," Ava said after a moment, "I never planned for any of this. I just wanted to make things right." "You did," Richard said. "Even if the world doesn't see it yet." "And you?" she asked. "Why stand by me?" He looked at her, eyes sincere. "Because I've spent my life standing for all the wrong things. Maybe it's time I learned what the right side feels like." She smiled faintly. "Careful, Mr. Calloway. You're starting to sound like a decent human being." "Terrifying, isn't it?" he said with a grin. She laughed, a real, unguarded laugh that surprised them both. The sound filled the room like sunlight. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, Ava lingered in her office, looking out at the city lights. Her reflection in the glass looked older, wiser, maybe even freer. The door opened behind her. Richard leaned against the frame. "You should get some rest," he said. "You've earned it." "You too," she said. "But somehow I don't think either of us will." He smiled. "Probably not." For a moment, neither moved. The air between them was charged, filled with the kind of silence that says everything words can't. Then Ava turned back to the window. "Tomorrow's going to be worse, you know. The press won't let this go." "Then we face it together," he said simply. "Whatever comes next." She glanced at him, studying his face, the honesty there, the quiet strength. "Together," she repeated softly. The word felt right. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was fighting alone. The days following the board vote were a blur of flashing cameras, tense meetings, and cautious applause. Ava had survived, but survival wasn't victory, it was endurance. The company was divided, the press relentless, and the weight of her every decision felt heavier than ever. Yet, in the midst of the noise, one constant remained: Richard. Their late-night strategy sessions had become the quiet heart of the storm. They worked side by side, often without speaking, their connection growing in the silence between thoughts. It wasn't about attraction, not entirely, it was recognition. Two people who'd lived on opposite ends of power now meeting in the middle, scarred but still standing. One evening, after a 12-hour day, Ava closed her laptop and rubbed her temples. "We're losing the narrative," she said. "The press is twisting everything again. The janitor's daughter becomes CEO by deception. They're not seeing the bigger picture." Richard leaned back in his chair, watching her. "Then show them the picture they're missing." "I've tried." "No," he said. "You defended yourself. There's a difference." She looked up at him, tired but curious. "So what are you suggesting?" "Let them see you," he said simply. "Not the title. Not the company. You." She raised an eyebrow. "You think a personal interview will fix this?" "Not fix," he said. "Humanize." The word lingered between them, soft but powerful. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. Set it up." The next morning, Ava sat across from one of the most respected journalists in New York. The cameras rolled. The lights were blinding. Every question was a knife. "Ms. Thompson, you lied to your employees," the journalist said. "You infiltrated your own company. How can anyone trust a leader who starts with deceit?" Ava took a slow breath. "I didn't lie," she said calmly. "I listened. I walked in the shoes of the people this company forgot. I swept the floors my mother once cleaned. I heard the fears no one dared to say out loud. If that's deceit, then maybe honesty looks different than comfort. The studio went quiet. Even the journalist hesitated before the next question. When the interview aired that evening, something shifted. The public response was overwhelming, messages from workers across industries, thanking her for saying what they couldn't. For a moment, it felt like the tide was turning. But just as hope flickered, a new threat emerged. Late that night, Richard received an anonymous email with a single attachment, an internal report from 10 years ago. A payout. A settlement. A signature. His father's. The name at the bottom froze him, R. Thompson. Ava's mother. Richard's chest tightened as the truth crashed over him. His father had silenced Ava's mother years ago. She hadn't just been a janitor. She'd been the one who reported workplace harassment against a senior executive. His father. And the company buried it. The settlement, the NDA, everything. That was the rot Ava had been trying to expose all along. And he was part of it. He sat in silence for nearly an hour, the document glowing on his screen. Then he printed it, folded it neatly, and slipped it into his coat pocket. The next morning, he found Ava in her office, reviewing the flood of interview responses. She looked up and smiled faintly. "You saw it?" she asked. "The interview?" "Yeah," he said softly. "You were brilliant." But his eyes betrayed him. She frowned. "What is it?" He hesitated, then placed the folder on her desk. "You should see this." Ava opened it. Her smile faded. Her eye scanned the document once, twice, and then she froze. The room seemed to shrink. The air went cold. "Where did you get this?" she whispered. "It was sent to me last night," he said quietly. "Ava, I didn't know. I swear to you, I had no idea." She stood, her hands trembling slightly. "Your father, yes," he said. "He covered it up. He paid her off. He made it disappear." Her voice shook, not with fear, but with rage. She died thinking no one cared. That what she went through didn't matter. Richard's eyes filled with guilt. "I know. And I can't undo it. But I can expose it. If you'll let me." "If I'll let you," she repeated, her voice breaking. "Richard, that's my mother's pain, my family's history, hidden behind your family's name." He stepped closer, desperate, but she moved back. "Ava, please, don't," she said sharply. "Don't say you understand." The silence that followed was suffocating. The bond they'd built, the fragile trust, fractured in an instant. Finally, Ava spoke, her voice low but steady. "You want to make this right? Then help me burn down every lie your father built. No excuses. No mercy." Richard met her gaze. "Whatever it takes." She nodded once, her jaw set. "Good. Because when this comes out, there's no going back, for either of us." He nodded slowly. "Then we go forward." Outside, the wind howled through the city, rattling the windows like a warning. Inside, two people who had finally found understanding now stood on opposite sides of truth and legacy, united by purpose, divided by blood.